So maybe let's put a form on the page. We like forms. Now this render method needs to return a single JSX element. So if I want to put more in here, I'm going to have to wrap it all in some sort of div. First of all, if you want more than one line here, you need to wrap it in parentheses. So we'll just wrap this in parentheses, put it here. Let's see what happens if I just make the form right under here. Already exploding. Adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. In other words, there has to be something that contains both of these. I can't return multiple elements. Not like that. I have to return a single element, so I could just put a div that contains both of these. Then I'm just returning the one div. So I'm returning a single element that just happens to have children. Inside the form, how about we put an input? Oh, it didn't expand. Remember, you must have a closing tag. So we'll make it self-closing. Put that / right before the angle bracket. Now I've got one here. We can go ahead and put a placeholder if we want. Go ahead and put a button in here if we want. Why not? Sign me up. Outside the form, let's put a UL. And then what we want to happen is for whatever we type in there to get added to the UL. Now first, this is going to look kind of like what we do in old school JavaScript. And it won't be until we get a lot more complicated that it becomes obvious how much simpler this can be. We could also use Foundation to style this thing if we wanted. Relatively easy. They make that easy in CodePen. If I go to Settings, CSS, add external style sheets, just like we added React, I could do a quick add of Foundation. See, the style changed a little bit. Then we could use some of the same classes we were using before. Give our button a class of expanded success button. Sure, why not? Now, this should have exploded, but it's being nice to us. This looks like HTML, but it's JSX. It's more like JavaScript. And you can't actually say class in the middle. You need to say class name, like this, camel cased. I don't know why it didn't explode on site in CodePen, but it would if you tried to do that in your own code. So that's the other big difference you're going to see. You're going to see self-closing tags, and you have to use class name instead of class. Let's also give our input a type equals of text. Now that's the default, but if we actually include that in there, then Foundation will style that as well. Now, gosh dang, that's awfully wide. We could use their little grid system real quick, but I'm not going to worry about it. Man, that's huge. And here, let me do something real quick. Change view. JSX is so React was created by Facebook, so was JSX. And it's basically, you don't strictly speaking have to use React to use JSX, but it's a shorthand for creating JavaScript objects out of tags, basically. So we're really creating JavaScript objects with every single one of these tags that we make. It's just a shorthand for doing that so that we can write markup instead of having to write a bunch of like .create element nonsense. So it's just a much easier way of doing that. And then adding children to the element. We can just do all that by nesting tags like we would in HTML. So it's not really HTML, but it looks like it. We're returning it from JavaScript. But browsers cannot understand this natively. So here, I'm going to paste a link in Slack. Session 1 morning. So this is a link to this code pin in professor mode, which means you can follow along with everything I type on your screen. You can actually copy and paste out of there as well. So if you want to keep up with it that way, and then you can scroll however you want in real time. So check that out. Now we no longer use add event listener. Now we're going to do it more like the old way of doing it in JavaScript, and we're actually going to put on submit in the middle of the markup. But now it's camel cased, because JSX is case sensitive, unlike HTML. And all of these things I've been putting here that look like attributes, they're called props. And they're one of the two big things about React, the other being state. So React components have state, and that is its data. That is the data for that component. Props are how you get data from outside a component into it. So they're basically like arguments that you pass to a function. This will make a lot more sense with more examples. But basically, props are data coming from the outside of a component into that component. So if this input thing is a component, I am passing in a prop called type with a value of text. Now, props can have string values like that using quotes, just like HTML attributes. Or you can put any JavaScript expression you want. You just have to put curly braces instead of quotes. So now inside there, I can put any JavaScript expression I want. Such as the name of a function. So I could write a method here inside my component called handle submit. And then I could say on submit equal this dot handle submit. Now, when I first saw JSX, I thought this kind of stuff was disgusting. We'd spent so long trying to come up with good ways to keep our presentation separate from our behavior. The thing about React is it's kind of all in one. You break your page up into little tiny bite-sized pieces called components. And then each component kind of stands alone. And it has all the markup you need, all the CSS you need, and all the behavior, all the JavaScript you need, all in one thing. And this would get super unwieldy mixing behavior and presentation together if the components weren't so dang small. So realistically, even a component this small, I would probably make multiple components if I were doing this in a real app. Yeah.
Question: when we are referring to, say, the button, the class name, the sign me up button, are we going to refer the classes? Like, are we going to do dot class or class name?
We're not going to do any of that kind of stuff anymore. We're not going to mess with the DOM. So we're not going to query select to get that thing or anything like that.
How do you play with the buttons? Like, how do you?
It's all totally different. Is the short version. So we're going to see. So yeah, everything you did before, you do differently now. Yeah, it's all very different. Now, our handle submit thing will still get an event. Let's see if we can actually. Let me see if we can do something like this. Now, what happens if I try to submit this thing? Okay, I got object. So we still get some sort of event object. Does it still have a target? It does. HTML form element. So that works basically the same way. I'll tell you that the event you get here is not strictly speaking a raw DOM event. React puts a little wrapper around it, but it works basically the same way. You still have a target and stuff like that. And yes, you can still prevent default, which we are going to have to do. So far, not wildly different. But now, all I want handle submit to do is add another Acrobat. So I refer to the fact that components have something called state. That's where all the data lives. And that's what I was trying to sort of emulate by keeping track of those flicks in an array on our previous app. I was trying to emulate the idea of state. But here it's a real thing. So what you do, if you have state in a component, is you add a constructor. And one thing you absolutely have to do inside the constructor of a React component is call super. So that's going to call the constructor on React.component itself, the class you're inheriting from. Just know if you're ever going to add a constructor, and you don't always have to, we haven't so far, if you add a constructor to your component, you must call super because it's going to do a whole bunch of other stuff. So this will just take care of all that. And then we'll initialize our state, which is simply this.state. And it's an object with whatever keys and values we want. So I'm going to give it one key, Acrobats, and it's going to be an empty array. And as usual, I could put my trailing comma there because I'm afraid I'll forget it. And then all I want to do when I handle submit is put a new Acrobat in that list. But here's the trick. I don't just say this.state.acrobats.push. You never modify state directly. Only in the constructor do you assign it. From then on, you need to call a method called setState. The reason is React is watching that state object. And when it changes, it knows that it needs to redraw the page. It needs to re-render that component because something changed in its data. And if you modify it directly or reassign it, it doesn't see that. So it gives us a method for that called setState. And that's what we need to do. So to do that, and I realize so far this doesn't seem like React is a whole lot simpler. But you get used to all this stuff. So if we want to change the state, the first thing we want to do is make a copy of it. So basically we want to say something like const acrobats equals this.state.acrobats, except we learned earlier that when you do that, it's not going to make a copy of it. It's going to give you the original. which is exactly what we didn't want to do, right? So we want a copy of this thing. So how the heck do you make a copy of an object, since it seems like anytime we do anything with an object, we're always dealing with the original? Well, this is a cool thing in ES6. I'll talk more about this thing later. It's called the spread operator. But in this case, Acrobats is an array, right? So we want to make a copy of the array. But what you can do, and again, we'll talk later about how this actually works. So here we've made an array that has this.state.acrobats as its first element, right? But what we can do is use this spread operator, which is an ellipsis. 3 dots, this.state.acrobats. So now I have an array literal, that's my square brackets. And inside there, what that spread operator does is it takes everything that's in this.state.acrobats and puts them inside this array. So we are effectively making a copy of the original array. So no longer will changing it change the original. So I get a brand new array by using the square brackets there. And by using the spread operator in front of another array, I end up with a copy of the original array. Yeah.
Isn't there like a dot copy function or something?
Even that is not real straightforward to use. Spread operator is a lot easier. There is nothing as simple as it ought to be. There's not a real simple way. But this will do it. The spread operator just breaks an array into its components. Surrounding that with a new array just puts them inside that. So now I end up with a copy of the original array, and that's what I will change. Acrobats.push. Whatever was typed in there. And I don't know how to do that yet. So let's just push another acrobat for right now. So then we've modified it, and we can use this.setState. This.setState, you just pass it a new object and pass it only the keys that you've actually changed. If there were a lot more items in state and we were only changing acrobats, acrobats is the only key we would have to pass in here. It won't blow away all the other objects. You're not completely replacing state with this. You're just telling it the differences, really. Here's another nice little ES6 shortcut that we could have been using all along. If you have an object literal like this, and you have a key and a value, and the value happens to be stored in a variable with the same name as your key, you can shorten it to that. You can just say acrobats, and that is the same as typing acrobats.acrobat or :acrobats. So if you have a variable that happens to have the same name as your key, you can just do it like that. So at that point, I would just make this a one-liner. And we're going to be doing this a lot, so we're going to start using that shorthand. But just know that that's what I'm actually doing there. I'm actually passing in an object with a key of acrobats, and its value is this variable acrobats. Now the question is, how do I get what's out of there? But first, let's see if, well, we don't have a great way to test this. We have a UL here. And we want the UL to have an LI for everything that happens to be in that array. So for every item in an array, we want to do the same thing. How do we do that? How do we do the same thing? How do we say run the same function on every item in an array? For each. And the other way we learned? Map. The difference being map returns an array with the return values of that function. And in this case, that's what we want, because we actually want the things to be rendered. So here's what I mean. First of all, check this out. Let's add another thing to state here. Name the string Davy. Now what if I want to put that on the page somewhere? Just put a paragraph in here. If you want to include some JavaScript in the middle of your markup, just put curly braces. Hey, this.state.name. Hey, Davey. Totally works. That's what I could do inside my UL. Is a little bit of JavaScript. So I've got this.state.acrobats. And I want to do the same thing for every acrobat that's in there. So I'm going to call map. Now map is going to give us an argument containing the current item in the array, right? So an acrobat. And let's use an arrow function here. What do I want to do for every acrobat? I want to make an LI with that acrobat in it. This is JSX. I can totally return that from a function. And a one-line arrow function, you may remember, I think I briefly mentioned this, that thing will automatically be returned. You don't have to use the keyword return. If it's a single line arrow function, then the expression you put in there will automatically be the return value. So this is going to return that LI, which means map is going to return an array of LIs. Put an array of elements in the middle of JSX, and it's going to render those elements. So let's test this out. Let's, instead of making acrobats start out as an empty array, let's put Will, TJ, Gabby with a Y, I, Maddie with a Y. That's right. Maddie. Look at that. They're just there. Never mind all that handle submit stuff. All I did was put them in state, map over them, spit out an LI, and they're just there. I really should have done that before the submit thing. So to get them all to render on the page, that's all you have to do. Never mind handling an event. Let's just get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of our handle submit. We have a constructor. We set state. We put an array called acrobats in there. There's the array. On our page, we just map over that array, spitting out an LI for each one, and they're just on the page, like that. It's just that easy.